name is Fernando Diaz, and today I want to talk to you a little bit about my research in information access and context. So I'm a new faculty member in the Language Technology Institute at Carnegie Mellon University. So when we refer to information access, I want us to think about two types of technologies that you might be familiar with. The first is search technology, which is when we have these information needs and we proactively search for information, for example, on the web. And the second set of technologies are recommendation system technologies, where it's much more passive, where you're not proactively searching a specific topic, you're rather inviting the system to provide you with recommendations for relevant content to you. Now, information access systems are tools that we use usually to sift through large amounts of information or data. So we integrate these tools into everyday tasks like literature reviews for public databases, finding emails and personal archives, looking for recipes when we're cooking a meal. And historically, we've organized and accessed information through physical institutions like public libraries. And with the advent of search engines, we've complemented physical libraries with access to online data, for example, on the web. Now, recent advances in machine learning, of course, mean that this is going to change. So rather than cracking open our laptop or going to our desktop computer, we'll be interacting with some sort of device that in some natural language interface. And as a result, this is likely to change how we organize information, how we access information, and actually who's accessing information at all. And these are the sorts of questions that I'm asking myself in my own research. So let me just highlight a few different projects that I have that are relevant to these questions. So first, when we think about interacting with these technologies such as search engines, we normally think about a population of searchers or users looking for information. In this case, for entertainment information, for cooking information, for perhaps work information. One thing that we think about a little bit less are the individuals, the people that are behind the content that's online in these repositories. So this includes individual authors, journalists, content creators, musicians, etc. And in work that I've been doing with multiple colleagues in the social sciences, we've been starting to ask ourselves, what are the broader implications of having this machine mediation on this corpus of human artifacts? And the sorts of questions we've been asking ourselves are, how does algorithmic recommendation and generation affect the consumption of cultural content? So what sorts of genres are actually being sought out, and what sorts of things are being accessed in that repository? Secondly, we're also asking ourselves, how does algorithmic recommendation and generation affect the livelihood and incentives of content creators? And then finally, how do these impacts, however they emerge, align with our values that we might have with respect to culture and promoting a diversity of culture, for example? The next line of research looks at how users actually engage with these systems. And increasingly, something that we're noticing is that when people are approaching these systems, they're not just looking for factual information that's new to them. They're actually using these search engines to refine information about experiences that they've had in the past. So, for example, a pretty well-known class of queries is referred to as the tip of the tongue query, where people have some idea about what they're looking for because they've seen, for example, a movie before, but they don't actually know the name of it. These are extremely frustrating states that a user can get into, and the queries that they might express are rife with uncertainty, etc. And so from a search provider perspective, these are extremely important and interesting classes of queries because they have high levels of uncertainty, as I mentioned, so users may not remember exactly, for example, what actors are in the movie. We might also leverage dialogue or interaction with the user in order to help disambiguate some of that uncertainty and resolve it. And then finally, because we're, especially in the movie context, we're talking about cultural goods, we want to make sure that we're supporting the refining of information robustly across different cultures, that we're not privileging any cultures that are well dominated in whatever catalog we're searching from. Now, the final thread of work that I've been looking at is asking who is actually interacting with the retrieval system. And in work that I published with some colleagues now last year, we started to think about how we can augment machine learning systems, so artificial intelligence, with capabilities to actually search for information. So just in the same way that when we're trying to solve some task or find entertainment, we might query a search engine or recommender system, we imagine that a machine might now be part of this population of users that's engaging with a search engine. And so the questions you might ask here are, how do we design search engines to support machine users with a diverse set of needs and capabilities? Or how can we ground predictive model output in human artifacts? In other words, in order to improve the transparency or the reliability of information that's being generated. And then finally, more from an effectiveness point of view, how can we leverage the unbounded storage that's available in an information access system in order to improve generalization? Now, all of these questions are fundamentally algorithmic questions. So how do I build a better system? But the way that we get there is by first working together with folks outside of the computer sciences in order to understand how users are interacting with these systems, what their needs are, and then how to design the systems to satisfy those needs. And moreover, if we think about the broader implications of artificial intelligence and language technologies, we need to engage with colleagues in the social sciences, humanities, and legal studies in order to understand what are, say, the normative values that we want to preserve when we're designing these technologies. And so those are the three legs upon which my research stands, and I look forward to pursuing that in the next coming years.